Did you know Hawaii isn't even part of North America? Or that you've been lied to about what you can see from space? And what if the number of continents you learned in school isn't actually right? Welcome to Hidden on Earth, where we uncover the world's strangest truths and biggest geography myths. Today, we're diving deep into 50 fake geography facts that everyone still believes. Let's set the record straight. Fact 50. Antarctica and the South Pole are not the same thing. People use Antarctica and the South Pole like they're identical, but they're not even the same type of thing. Antarctica is a continent, a massive landmass covered in ice, mountains, and research stations. The South Pole is a single point, the southern end of Earth's rotational axis. So the South Pole is inside Antarctica, but Antarctica is an entire continent that spans thousands of miles beyond that one dot. Fact 49, there are actually 4 South Poles. When you say South Pole, you might mean different locations depending on the definition. The geographic South Pole is where Earth's spin axis meets the surface. The magnetic South Pole is where magnetic field lines point straight down into Earth, except it moves over time, as Earth's magnetic field shifts. The geomagnetic South Pole is a simplified, averaged model used for mapping and physics, and the pole of inaccessibility is the most remote point of Antarctica, farthest from any coastline, making it brutally hard to reach. Fact 48. You cannot see the Great Wall of China from space. This myth is one of the most famous geography facts on Earth, and it's wrong. From low Earth orbit, the Great Wall is long but thin, and it blends into the surrounding terrain in color and texture. Astronauts can photograph it from space with telephoto lenses, but that's not the same as seeing it clearly with the naked eye. In fact, large airports, highways, and bright city grids are usually easier to spot than the wall, especially at night. Fact 47. Greenland is much smaller than Africa. Greenland looks enormous on many world maps, but that's mainly because of the Mercator projection, which inflates areas near the poles. Greenland is about 2.16 million square kilometers, while Africa is about 30.37 million square kilometers, meaning Africa is roughly 14 times larger. On a flat map, Greenland can look comparable to Africa, but on a globe or equal area projection, the difference is shocking. Fact 46. Africa is much bigger than you think. Africa's size is routinely underestimated because the equator region gets squeezed on common world maps. Africa is so large that you can fit multiple major countries inside it, and still have room left over. One reason this matters is that map distortion shapes how people picture global scale, travel distances, and even world events. If your mental map makes Africa look medium-sized, your map is lying. Fact 45. Finland is not part of Scandinavia. A lot of people call all of Northern Europe Scandinavia, but that's not technically correct. Scandinavia usually refers to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, tied together by history, language roots, and geography. Finland is part of the Nordic countries, but it has a very different linguistic background. Finnish is from the Uralic language family, not the Germanic roots that connect Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. Finland is still culturally close to its neighbors, but Scandinavian isn't the right label. Fact 44. The Nile may not be the longest river in the world. For generations, the Nile was taught as the longest river on Earth, but modern measurements often challenge that. Determining a river's true length is messy. Rivers have multiple sources, seasonal channels, and branching tributaries, and where you choose the start changes the number. Some surveys suggest the Amazon edges out the Nile by a relatively small margin, tens of miles, while others argue measurement methods aren't consistent. The takeaway: the Nile is definitely one of the longest, but it's not the undisputed champion. Common geographic definitions, Elbrus lies on the European side, making it Europe's tallest peak. Fact 42. There is no universally agreed line between Europe and Asia. Europe and Asia aren't separated by an ocean. They're part of one huge landmass, which makes the border partly a human decision. Many maps use the Ural Mountains as a divider, then connects to rivers and seas like the Caspian region. Other maps shift the border south through the Caucasus. This is why countries like Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan can be described differently depending on the map maker. Europe versus Asia is as much tradition and convention as it is geology. Fact 41. Egypt is not completely in Africa. Egypt is mostly African, but the Sinai Peninsula sits on the Asian side of the Suez Canal. That makes Egypt a transcontinental country. It's a great example of how continents aren't always neat and clean categories, especially around narrow land bridges and canal cuts. When people say Egypt is in Africa, they're mostly right, just not 100% right. Fact 40. Part of Kazakhstan is in Europe. Kazakhstan is typically labeled as an Asian country, but some geographic definitions place its western territory in Europe. If you draw the boundary using the Ural region definitions, land west of certain rivers, commonly the Ural-Emba mapping traditions, can fall on the European side. So, depending on the framework, Kazakhstan becomes another transcontinental country, similar to Russia and Turkey. Fact 39. Russia is not purely European or purely Asian. Russia is the classic both country. Most of its population is concentrated in the West, and much of its political and cultural history is intertwined with Europe, but the majority of its land area stretches across northern Asia, reaching the Pacific. That's why Eurasian often describes Russia better than forcing it into a single continent box. Fact 38. The world doesn't necessarily have 7 continents. 7 continents is the most common model in English-speaking education, but it's not universal. Some countries teach a 6-continent model, combining North and South America as America. Others teach 5 continents, sometimes excluding Antarctica. There are also continental landmass arguments that combine Europe and Asia into Eurasia. Continent counts change depending on whether you prioritize culture, geology, or simple land separation by water. Fact 37. Holland is not just another name for the Netherlands. Holland isn't the whole country, it's a region, specifically tied to 2 provinces, North Holland and South Holland. The reason the name spread is historical and economic. Many internationally famous Dutch cities are in those provinces, including Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Over time, outsiders use the regional name to refer to the whole country. It's like calling the entire United States California because that's what you hear about most. Fact 36. Great Britain and the United Kingdom are not the same. These terms get mixed constantly, especially outside Europe. Great Britain is the island containing England, Scotland, and Wales. The United Kingdom is a sovereign country that includes those 3 plus Northern Ireland. So, someone can be British and live in Northern Ireland, UK, but Northern Ireland is not part of Great Britain, the island. Same neighborhood, different definitions. Fact 35. Iceland is not icy. Iceland sounds like it should be frozen year-round, but much of the island is surprisingly green, especially along the coasts, where most people live. Yes, Iceland has glaciers, including some massive ice caps, but it's also full of grasslands, volcanic landscapes, and coastal towns, with relatively moderate conditions for its latitude. The name is more history and branding than accurate climate description. Fact 34. Lagos is not the capital of Nigeria. Lagos is huge and globally famous, which is why people assume it's the capital. But Nigeria's capital is Abuja, and the change was made to create a more centrally located seat of government. Lagos is still Nigeria's major economic powerhouse and largest city, but biggest city and capital are not the same thing. Fact 33, the Sahara is not the world's largest desert. When most people hear desert, they imagine sand dunes and heat, but deserts are defined by lack of precipitation, not temperature. By that definition, Antarctica is the world's largest desert, because it gets extremely low snowfall and has massive arid regions called the Antarctic Polar Desert. The Sahara is the largest hot desert, but not the largest overall. Fact 32, the Sahara is also not the world's driest desert. The Sahara is dry, but it's not the driest. The Atacama Desert in Chile is often cited as the driest non-polar desert on Earth, with some areas receiving almost no rainfall for extreme stretches of time. In certain zones, rain can be so rare that it becomes a historic event. The Sahara can have storms and seasonal patterns, just far less than greener climates. Fact 31, deserts aren't necessarily sandy. Sand dunes look desertish, so people assume all deserts are like that. But many deserts are rocky, gravelly, or salty, full of stony plains, badlands, and salt flats. Sand forms where there's the right mix of erosion and wind patterns, but it's not required. If an area is arid enough, it can be a desert even if it doesn't look like a postcard. Fact 30, Everest is not the tallest mountain in the world. Everest is the highest above sea level, but tallest depends on measurement. Mauna Kea in Hawaii is taller from base to summit because much of its base is underwater. And Chimborazo in Ecuador has a summit that's farther from Earth's center than Everest, due to Earth's equatorial bulge, meaning it's technically the closest mountain peak to space if you measure that way. Fact 29, the Earth is not a perfect sphere. Earth is an oblate spheroid, slightly squashed at the poles and bulged at the equator due to rotation. That difference sounds small, but it matters for satellite orbits, GPS, and precise mapping. Most globes stay perfectly round because it's simpler for education and manufacturing. So we grow up thinking sphere, even though slightly flattened sphere is more accurate. Fact 28, Toronto is not the capital of Canada. Toronto is Canada's largest city and economic engine, so it gets mistaken for the capital constantly. But the capital is Ottawa, chosen in part because it sat in a strategically defensible and politically balanced location between English and French regions. Capitals aren't always the biggest city. Sometimes they're chosen to reduce rivalry or centralize governance. Fact 27, Geneva is not the Swiss capital. Geneva is internationally famous because it hosts major global organizations, so people assume it's Switzerland's capital. But the Swiss federal city is Bern. Switzerland's structure is highly decentralized, so the capital role is quieter than in many countries, which adds to the confusion. Fact 26, Antarctica is not as big as you think. On many maps, Antarctica looks enormous because of projection distortion near the poles. While it's still huge, it's not the giant slab people imagine from a stretched world map. On some projections, Antarctica balloons visually, which exaggerates its footprint compared to continents closer to the equator. Fact 25, the Mississippi is not the longest river in the US. The Mississippi is iconic and vital for shipping, agriculture, and US history. But the Missouri River is longer. The confusion comes from the Mississippi's fame and central role in American identity. Most important doesn't always mean longest. Fact 24, city and economic heart. But South Africa divides government functions across 3 capitals: Pretoria, executive; Cape Town, legislative; and Bloemfontein, judicial. This setup reflects historical compromise and regional balance. It's unusual, but it's official, and it trips people up all the time. Fact 23, Maine is not the US's easternmost state. This one feels impossible until you remember the Earth is split into hemispheres. Parts of Alaska's Aleutian Islands cross into the eastern hemisphere, which makes Alaska technically the easternmost state by longitude. Maine is the easternmost point in the contiguous US, but not in the entire United States. Fact 22, Hawaii is not in North America. Hawaii is a US state, but geographically it's part of Polynesia, within the wider region of Oceania. It's not connected to the North American continent, and its cultural and linguistic roots tie closely to other Polynesian island groups. That's why calling it North America is political in one sense, but geographically inaccurate. Fact 21, Europe is not exactly east of the US. Many Americans assume Europe sits directly east across the Atlantic, but Europe is often farther north than people picture. London's latitude is higher than most of the contiguous US. Even sunny European cities can line up with surprising US comparisons. Our mental maps are heavily shaped by how maps are drawn and how climates feel, not by true latitude. Fact 20. Europe isn't warmer than North America just because of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream contributes, but it's not the main reason Europe's winters can be milder than similar latitudes in North America. Atmospheric circulation patterns, prevailing winds, ocean heat storage, and continental geography all matter. It's a bigger climate system story than one current warming Europe. Fact 19. The world actually has 5 oceans. Most people list 4, but many modern references include the Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica. It's defined by powerful currents and shared oceanographic characteristics, which makes it distinct. The 5-ocean model is increasingly common in education and mapping. Fact 18. Australia is not the world's biggest island. Australia gets called an island continent, but many geographers treat islands and continents as separate categories. If you define an island as land fully surrounded by water and smaller than a continent, then Australia doesn't qualify as an island in that sense. Under that framing, Greenland becomes the largest island on Earth. Fact 17. Greenland is not its own country. Greenland has its own identity, language, and a high level of self-governance, but it's still part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark controls areas like defense and foreign policy, while Greenland handles much of its internal governance. The country versus autonomous territory distinction is subtle, so people oversimplify it as independence. Fact 16. Most of Africa is actually above the equator. Many people picture Africa as mostly southern hemisphere, but a large portion sits north of the equator. The Sahara covers massive northern areas, and because deserts feel tropical or southern in people's minds, it skews perception. Geography reality, Africa straddles the equator broadly, and the north is enormous. Fact 15. Lakes are not the biggest source of fresh water. When you picture fresh water, you probably imagine lakes, but most of Earth's fresh water is locked in ice caps and glaciers, especially in Antarctica and Greenland. Lakes and rivers hold only a tiny fraction. That's why melting ice affects sea levels and global systems, even though it doesn't look like water storage at first glance. Fact 14. The country with the most time zones isn't Russia. Russia has a huge number of time zones, but France can span even more depending on how you count overseas territories. From islands in the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, France's global footprint stretches across the clock. It's one of the best examples of how colonial history still affects modern geography stats. Fact 13. China does not have the world's largest population. For a long time, China was number 1, so the fact stuck. But India has surpassed China in population according to widely cited modern estimates. And now China's population growth has slowed and even declined in some measures. Geography facts tied to demographics change over time, and textbooks often lag behind reality. Fact 12, Antarctica does observe different times. Antarctica isn't divided into official time zones like inhabited continents, but research stations still follow time for daily life. Many stations use the time of the country that runs them or the nearest supply routes. So Antarctica can feel like a patchwork of clocks chosen for logistics rather than longitude. Fact 11, the North and South Pole are human choices in a bigger sense. Magnetic poles exist, but labeling one direction up, deciding which pole is north, and placing the north at the top of maps is a human convention. Space doesn't have an up. We oriented the maps the way we did due to history, navigation, and where most people live. It's practical, just not a law of the universe. Fact 10, New Zealand is not the closest country to Australia. New Zealand is Australia's closest cultural neighbor, but not the closest by distance. Papua New Guinea sits much closer to Australia's north, and islands in the Torres Strait sit only a few miles apart from PNG territory. Maps make New Zealand look next door, but the ocean distances in that region are massive. Fact 9, countries on the equator aren't always hot. Latitude matters, but altitude can completely flip the climate. Cities near the equator at high elevation can be mild or even chilly year-round. Mountains near the equator can hold glaciers despite receiving strong sun angles. The equator equals always hot rule ignores topography, and topography is everything. Fact 8, Central America is part of North America. People often treat Central America as its own continent or lump it into South America, but geographically, it's generally part of North America. It's a sub-region of the North American continent connecting Mexico to Colombia. Cultural regions and geographic continents don't always match, which creates the confusion. Fact 7, Portugal is not a Mediterranean country. Portugal has Mediterranean-like culture and climate in places, but it does not border the Mediterranean Sea. Portugal's coastline faces the Atlantic Ocean, and the Mediterranean's western gateway is at the Strait of Gibraltar. Mediterranean country can mean climate or culture in casual speech, but geographically, Portugal isn't one. Fact 6, Venice is not the only or biggest city of canals. Venice is famous for canals, but other cities have more canal mileage. Amsterdam has extensive canal networks, and even Birmingham in England has more canals than people expect. Venice wins on fame and aesthetics, but not necessarily on raw canal quantity. Fact 5, the Statue of Liberty isn't simply in New York. Lady Liberty is tied to New York City culturally, but geography and borders make it complicated. Liberty Island is associated with New York, yet it sits in waters tied to New Jersey, and the site is managed federally. It's one of those depends on what you mean geography answers. Fact 4, you can see Russia from Alaska. This isn't just a political talking point, it's physically true. The Diomede Islands sit close enough that on clear days, you can see across. Visibility depends on weather, curvature, and conditions, but the Bering Strait region is narrow enough to make the sightline possible. Fact 3, the US isn't bordered by only two oceans. People learn Atlantic on the east and Pacific on the west, but Alaska touches the Arctic Ocean too. So the US borders 3 oceans, not 2. It's a simple fact that gets ignored because most maps and school lessons focus on the lower 48. Fact 2, there aren't exactly 195 countries. 195 is a commonly repeated number based on broad international recognition, but geopolitics complicates it. Some territories function like countries, but aren't universally recognized, and others have limited recognition from a small number of nations. The true count changes depending on the definition you use, so claiming one fixed number is misleading. Fact 1, people didn't think the Earth was flat before Columbus. This is one of the most stubborn myths in education. Educated people in the ancient world understood Earth's roundness long before Columbus. Greek thinkers argued for it centuries earlier, and estimates of Earth's size existed. Columbus's critics weren't afraid he'd fall off the edge. They worried he was underestimating distance and would run out of supplies before reaching Asia. Thanks for exploring with Hidden on Earth. If you love discovering the world's strangest truths and busting geography myths, hit subscribe. Tap the bell and drop a comment about which fact shocked you the most. Until next time, keep your maps open and your mind even wider.